Thank you for tuning in to Season 1 of the Movie Geeks United Art of the Documentary series. We hope you enjoy this brand new conversation with Aaron Wickenden, the editor of terrific documentaries like Best of Enemies and Finding Vivian Maier, who just completed his directorial debut as a feature documentarian with the film Almost There. For a complete listing of the new and archived interviews that make up Season 1 of this series, visit us online at moviegeeksunited.net.
In doc, you have to wear so many different hats, and I got used to, over the years, working on really small teams. I sort of came up through Cartumquin Films here in Chicago, which is, doc company that's been around since the 60s. And in particular, I was working with Steve James, and kind of came up working with him for about a decade on his projects. And so, from working with Steve, I saw the example in particular of somebody who edits, shoots, and directs, and produces. And so I think seeing that modeled for me as a young filmmaker as I was coming up made that seem like a natural step. Like, oh yeah, that's what somebody should be doing if they're making a film. So
sure,
I kind of followed in Steve's footsteps there.
So how did you happen upon your subject for Almost There?
Well, we met him at Pierogi Festival, which is this regional festival in northwest Indiana in Whiting. Happens every year. It's been going on for, I think, over a decade, if not 20 years. It's like an institution, and Oprah had named it like one of her top summer festivals, regional festivals. So it's not like a fringe event. It's known about. And some friends and I heard that they were trying to set the world record for the world's largest pierogi that year. So we had our camera gear and we went down and, we took a lot of pictures of this gigantic dough ball covered in butter. And we were kind of just there to sort of experience the strangeness of that world record, Guinness Book World Record setting event. But while we were there, we met Peter, and we had our gear and took some photographs, and that kind of started the ball rolling with a project that then consumed our lives for like the next 8 years of the filmmaking process.
When was it apparent to you that you had a movie?
That's a great question, because it didn't. The movie itself didn't start happening or become apparent for quite a while. Like, we originally thought that it was going to be a great photography project, and that's how we were approaching it and pitching it to people. We found Peter's work. They were these incredible scrapbooks filled with photographs and texts and, drawings, and we thought, like, let's give people the ability to open up a book and see all these things and read the stories and observe it. And we only started filming Peter once we started trying to put his story together in a linear fashion and make sense of it and understand, like, the arc of the stories. And we're like, these stories don't always add up. They don't always make sense. And there's things missing as storytellers that we would want to include. So we started interviewing him. And, DSLR cinematography was just something that was getting off the ground. So, we had bought nice DSLR cameras to do the photography, and lo and behold, we could shoot video footage with it, and everybody was getting excited about that. So we just were like, well, as long as we're interviewing him, let's film it. And so a lot of our early exchanges have this kind of natural interaction, in part because we weren't really considering that they would be part of a film. So it took a while for us to realize, like, this could be a really good film instead of a book. And to this day, there's no book. The book never materialized. So the project kind of morphed organically into what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because, there are all kinds of different documentaries out there. It's the most exquisite film art form for me. But in your film, the filmmakers are actually an intrinsic part of the unfolding narrative. So was that apparent to you from the start of this project that you and your co-director would play that kind of role?
I think that was an evolution too. We definitely come from a school where that's not of documentary filmmaking, where that's not verboten. Not necessary either. It just depends on if it fits the story or not. One of our primary influences as we were making the film was Steve James' film Stevie, which came out a number of years ago. Is available, I think, on Netflix at the moment. And it's a film about his relationship to somebody that he had mentored, through the, Big Brothers, Big Sisters program, early in his life before he had made Hoop Dreams, and then he had lost touch with Stevie and then kind of re-entered into his life. And so the film is, sort of grapples with their relationship and, what's happened to both of their lives in the interim when they've lost touch with each other. So for us, I think because the project started as a photography project, almost there, and then we then realized later that it had the potential to be a really interesting film. Like I was saying, we had filmed these interactions in a more casual way. We tried to, as soon as we knew we were making a film, we tried to kind of like have film in a more kind of observational style. But our subject also, Peter, he was really isolated, lived alone, didn't see people for weeks at a time. Sometimes, a whole month would go by and no one would come to visit him. He was, kind of hermiting out, in his place. And so, when he saw us, all he wanted to do was talk and hang out and interact. And so for us to sort of, ask him to sort of pretend that we weren't there didn't really work as a strategy. And that footage, which we do have, seemed kind of boring to us when we started to put the film together. It didn't have the energy and the dynamic that Peter and Dan's interactions had. And that came, as we edited the film, those interactions came to the surface more and became more of organizing idea for how the film should come together.
Yeah. Tell me about the battle between being respectful of your subject and yet trying to remain as objective as possible so you could tell his story truthfully. I mean, does that feel like a battle at times?
Yeah, I guess, subjective, objective. I mean, I think that we come down more on the line that, we're interested in subjective filmmaking, So the film is that. And, I think where we straddle the line is sort of how, is I think the film starts in a place where Peter has more of we're trying to give him agency, and we're trying to let him tell his story to such a degree that I think we maybe lose track of keeping an eye on well, is everything he's telling us true? And I think that if there's a line that gets a little muddied for us in the process of making the film, it's how much we interject to sort of frame what he's saying and telling us versus letting him just kind of tell his story as it is. But, subjective, objective, I think, the kind of films that interest us, and in me in particular, speaking for myself, are films where the filmmaker has a point of view, and that point of view comes through in the film.
Sure. I guess you answered it. That was the gist of my question, because there, from my standpoint, if I were to make a documentary film, I'm such a people pleaser. I wouldn't want the subject to be displeased with any part of the portrait, and yet you have to remain. It's your duty as a documentarian to remain true to what you see. Yeah. Well,
so Peter, when we finished the film, he was the first person we showed it to. And, he had been asking us, we worked on the edit for, about a year. And, he had been asking us through that whole process, are you going to talk about, Maier rest? Are you going to, what are you going to, what's going to be in the film? And, and he was really concerned, because it was a really traumatic event in his life, kind of the event that sent him into the basement where he had been living for, about 20 years when we met him. And, he was really concerned with how we were going to handle that material. And so but we didn't leave it out, we put it in the film. And so when we showed it to him, we were extremely nervous that he would, object to it, that he would want it cut out of the film. And in the end, he understood why it needed to be in the film and our position, and he said that we didn't need to change it. And in fact, he really appreciated that we allowed him to speak for himself when it came to dealing with the more complicated parts of his past.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I guess to answer your question, I think we did both stay true to truth, and what happened. We didn't sort of pussyfoot around, what had gone on in Peter and his background, and we were able to, at the same time, look him in the eye, show him the film, and feel good about what we had made.
Yeah.
We weren't trying to throw him under the bus or something.
When you're engaged in a project for so long, as you have been with this one, like you said, 8 years, a lot of filmmakers, I'm sure, if they have the gift for kind of looking at their career objectively, they can look from film to film, and they can kind of track their evolution as a filmmaker or their maturity in a way. But when you work on a single project for so many years, can you see that evolution in the same film? Does that make sense?
That makes sense. It's a great question. Yeah, I think you can. I mean, there's so much that happens within the span of 8 years, let alone, 4, 2. Technology, for one, changes so fast. So, I've seen a lot of filmmakers who start their film year 1, they're still working on it year 10, and they've committed to shooting in standard def or something, and it's 4:3, and no broadcasters want to take it anymore. So it's really, that's just a real obvious example. But then also in terms of craft and the filmmaker kind of evolving over time, I think that what's great is when you get to year 8. And you're putting the whole thing together, where you're at in your head at that time, your craft level, you're that person then shaping the film. That person now making the film. And so that kind of mental state, level of craft, is what kind of evens out the whole film. But yeah, definitely, when I look at some of our early footage, it's the wrong frame rate. It's, we have terrible sound. Production qualities are very low. And we weren't thinking about how it was going to fit into the whole. And so, there's a lot of like little missing pieces that if I was shooting it now, that I would capture. So yeah, technically things changed to a pretty big degree.
Well, I got to tell you, you have edited some of the most jaw-droppingly beautiful documentaries of recent years. For me personally, I mean, these are among my very favorite movies, and I want to talk about some of that work. But first of all, I want to know from you what led you on this path. I mean, what were the first sparks that ignited your interest in the documentary form?
Well, let's see. Film in general, like when I was in, junior high, I grew up in Flagstaff, Arizona, and, or at least my high school years. And while I was there, there was like a community access TV show that broadcast college courses from like Northern Arizona University. And I remember that I'd come home from school, from junior high, and there would be this show on that was like this college class, film class, film history, and I remember specifically that they were doing a semester on Orson Welles, and so I watched that, and that really kind of lit the spark of filmmaking in general, watching that, community access college class while I was in junior high. And then, from there I got really interested in Kubrick and obsessed with the idea about how he started his career as a photographer for Look magazine. And I thought, okay, that's, as a teenager, I'm like, that's the path, that's my model. I want to be like Kubrick. I should learn as much as possible about photography so I can understand that and then take that into directing. So I went to the University of Arizona. I majored in photography. I minored in media arts and took some film classes, but I really focused on photography. And I worked at the University of Arizona Center for Creative Photography, which is one of the world's foremost repository for master works by 20th century photographers. So we're talking Gary Winogrand, Ansel Adams, Richard Avedon. And Avedon, was still living when I was working at the Center for Creative Photography. So I got an internship with him one summer when I was 21. I went out to New York and I worked for Richard Avedon, and I was lucky enough to also get an internship with Annie Leibovitz. And so I had a summer kind of going back and forth between them and really sort of seeing what it was like to work with a master artist. And I kind of, at that time, had the opportunity to stay in New York and kind of continue on working for Avedon, but I wanted to concentrate on film. I thought that was sort of where I wanted to wind up, and rather than kind of working in a portrait studio. So I went back to school, got my degree, went out to Los Angeles, and I started working for Peter Broderick's company, Next Wave Films, which isn't around anymore. But Next Wave Films was set up to fund documentaries and low-budget independent films that were being shot digitally. And this was like the beginning of Dogma becoming really popular and people being like, wow, you can shoot a film on digital mini DV and you can have it be, transferred to film and play theatrically. Wow, this is like a new era. And so Next Wave was kind of financing that stuff through the independent film channel, and they were kind of like the nexus of, this budding movement. So, they funded Christopher Nolan's first film following, or acquired it and were distributing it. And, they also had a slate of documentaries and people applying with documentaries. And so, a film like Keep the River on Your Right, Amir Bar-Lev's first film, Fighter, those were coming through Next Wave when I was interning there, and I saw these films and I was just like catalyzed, like this is the kind of stuff that was grabbing me and exciting and vital. So, Amir's film in particular, Amir, who has gone on to do, My Kid Could Paint That and Happy Valley and many other fantastic, he has a, long, great career. I worked specifically on Fighter, helping to get that out into theaters and doing like grassroots promotion, passing out postcards. Around that same time, Ira Glass was speaking at UCLA, and I found out about it, and a friend told me, and this is, really early in This American Life's history, probably a couple years in, maybe. Mm-hmm. So I went to hear Ira Glass speak, and that was sort of the second event that kind of like lit the light bulb for me on documentary. So it was Next Wave Films and Ira Glass. And so I applied for an internship with This American Life, was a finalist but didn't get it, and in the process I moved to Chicago, fell in with Kartemquin Films in Chicago. Kartemquin, and, they weren't really looking for any photographer, cinematographer, budding director people at the time. And so, they needed somebody to work nights and put subtitles on this, 7-hour miniseries they were doing called The New Americans. And so I kind of signed up for that so that I'd have some work, and kind of quickly found that I enjoyed the post-production process. And, there's something really similar to editing and working in the darkroom, which was, what I had done as a student studying photography. And I really liked the methodical nature of it, the process, it was like developing a print and, dodging and burning and then developing it and doing it again and again and again, and spending hours. There was something real similar in editing. And so over time I kind of developed a love for it and realized that for documentary filmmaking, the editing is where the storytelling happens. The filming itself, you have a certain idea of what you're getting, but you're capturing so much. But the storytelling really appealed to me, and so I kind of started from there.
Well, it's interesting to hear you speak about your background, because when you talk about your experiences studying art and photography and that sort of thing, your time with Ansel Adams and so forth, looking at the films that you've worked on, there seems to be a definite attraction to the artist. I mean, not only with Almost There, but finding Vivian Maier and to a certain extent Best of Enemies. I mean, those, in a way, they are artists of kind of sumptuously articulated ideas. So that has to be that draws you in, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I'm lucky now, especially after Vivian Maier, which was, such a big and kind of unexpected success. I'm lucky now that I'm getting a lot of different people who I would have never had access to before a lot of different filmmakers approaching me to offer me work. Morgan Neville was one of those. I had met him in passing at the True Falls Film Festival a few years ago, and I have a good friend who works for him, Karen Capitosto, who's an amazing associate producer and who's now becoming a producer for Morgan. So Karen had recommended me for the job on Best of Enemies. But I'm really lucky now, I'm in this position where, because of working with Steve on his films, because of Vivian Maier and the profile of that film, I'm getting a lot of different offers, and I'm getting to kind of choose between projects, which is one of the joys of editing as opposed to directing. I mean, from directing my own film and being mired in it for, 8 years, editing is totally different. I get paid to go in and play in somebody's world, that they've done all the hard work of gathering the materials and doing the interviews and traveling all around the world to kind of like get the raw materials for the story. So in terms of the subject matter, yeah, I mean, I'll get offered things and, they sound good, they sound compelling. There's a lot of reasons why the film should be made, but it's not always the right film for me. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like I try to just kind of listen to myself when I describe the films I'm being offered to other people. So when I tell my wife, like, I got a job offer today about such and such, I try to kind of keep track of how excited I am about it. And if I'm not excited and it just sounds kind of like, oh, this would be good, it's probably not the right thing for me to take on. I want to, in a perfect world, I'd want to be able to take on films that really make my heart sing,
Yeah.
And I think in general, like you were saying, subject matter-wise, yeah, the stuff that's really appealing. I've had, the way my wife and I talk about it is, I've had the opportunity to edit a lot of films about rascals, people who are subverting authority or kind of charting their own course, larger than life characters, rascals.
Right. Yeah, I like that. In terms of editing the documentary, I mean, the thing that comes up most is just the wealth of footage that an editor has to work with when dealing in the documentary form. Tell me about the challenge of finding a structure for footage, if it's typically something that you discuss in detail with the director before you begin work. Highlighting point C, but making sure that doesn't trample on point B, or that whole process.
Yeah, well, it's a big question, and the process with every director is really different. Everybody has different ways they like to approach it, and different levels of comfortability with screening, getting feedback from screenings versus sending the film out to friends and colleagues to getting their feedback, to not doing that kind of stuff at all. So, as an editor, I have to be very adaptive and kind of roll with whatever the director is comfortable with. I think my job as an editor is to sort of, innovate and create and sort of do as much as I can to kind of, crack the essence of the film, get at what's most interesting, funny, entertaining, dramatic, and, doing it in whatever way I can, and then, also being completely comfortable with that not being the right thing for the film and the director kind of tossing it out. So I have to be like both, passionate and also dispassionate at the same time. So for like example, I think that, I should say, I think that attitude about, being passionate about it, but then also willing to let things go, if they're not right for the whole, came from working with Steve James, over the years, because I was kind of brought up as an editor, collaborating with him. We co-edited At the Death House Door, and we co-edited The Interrupters, and I would edit a scene and show it to Steve, and he would have notes, and I would change it, and then, he would edit stuff that I worked on as well. It's just a very, very fluid process, and, at least the process of working with him was that way. For other films, just getting back to your question, how do you approach a kind of mountain of footage? One of the first things I try to do is just get the director or the producer to just tell me the story in their own words as clearly as possible. And we just talk about it. And then I kind of repeat it back to them, and we talk about it and talk about it some more. And we talk about, like, okay, if we're telling that story, and I guess I listen to them, and it's like, okay, what did they start with? How did they try to hook me when they were just describing it? What are the key points? And so, we both go through the elevator pitch, but we also just talk about the film in general, like describe for me, the whole film. Sometimes they've already done this in a treatment form when I start the film, and we use that as a jumping off point. When I started on Best of Enemies, I co-edited that film with Eileen Maier, and Eileen had already done a lot of work with Morgan and Neville and Robert Gordon to narrow, sort of define, before the editing started, define kind of what were the key ideas in the film, and how would they generally be structured. And we deviated from that a lot, but, the core kind of beats of the story really came through the work that they had done. And then, once on my first day, I remember I sat down with Eileen and Karen, and we just sort of talked through the whole story beat by beat and how it might come together, and we jumped off from there. This is something I could probably talk about for a long, long time, and give you examples from every film. So, if there's other films you want more specific examples from, I could probably dredge those up from my memory. But editing is such a big process, Well, let me give you one more example from Best of Enemies that I think could be instructive. Is that, like, on that film, we also kind of grappled with the idea of, like, how is this film relevant today? What is it about, the battles between, Gore Vidal and William F. Buckley that, people are going to resonate with? And for a while, and so we try everything to address this idea. So at one point, we were even seeing things about, rioting, the rioting that was happening, around, Trayvon Martin, and that we were like, well, maybe these are things that we want to connect the film to, and so we would edit beats of the story and then flash forward to, contemporary events that were happening while we were making the film. We thought, okay, this is a way to make it, resonate for audiences. Ultimately, none of those ideas made it into the film, but those kind of experiments happen on every film throughout the process. You try all kinds of stuff, and I guess as I've gotten better as an editor, over time, one of the things I think that sort of sets me apart as an editor, and one of the things I really enjoy, is the challenge of taking on these experiments and trying anything and trying to use the same material in a variety of ways to ultimately get at the most concise and precise idea that the director has for the film.
Yeah. In the end, though, because I've heard a lot of narrative film directors talk about this as well, like at a certain point, the film tells you what it wants to be. And your main job is just to be open to receiving that.
Yep. I agree.
Does that make sense? Okay.
Yes, completely. And that doesn't usually happen with a doc for a while. Like I think it's not until it starts to be like an advanced rough cut where you're hitting certain beats and ideas are clicking and locking in, and making sense, and then it's sort of like, okay, for the whole, to work, you need to sacrifice some ideas or enhance others. So completely agree. Doing a film like Vivian Maier, doing a film like Best of Enemies, those are all films where editorially I've been given more free rein to be really playful with the way that I kind of approach the material, to not be as reverential about it as I was on earlier projects I was involved with. I'll give you a specific example. I remember at the Death House Door, when I was editing that in 2007, 2008 with Steve James, there was a really late night. I was up working on a scene, and it was about how Huntsville, Texas, where they have the most executions in Texas, how there's this sort of party atmosphere that emerged around some of the executions, where people would turn out and they would be outside, and in the town there was like a murder meal, kind of like Happy Meal that people could get. And I remember editing a version of it. I was kind of loopy. It was late. And I remember just thinking, wow, this would be really amazing with like the Huey Lewis song, I Want a New Drug. And, it's totally time period appropriate. If you look at the things that people were wearing in at that time, totally fit with the archival. And I remember showing it to Steve, and Steve just saying, that's totally nuts. You're out of your mind. There's like no way this fits in the film. And he was right. It didn't fit in the language of the film at all. But I think that, that moment stands out for me because it's like part of an impulse I think I have towards the way I treat archival. And I think on the more recent films I've worked on, there's been I've gotten to embrace that impulse a little bit more, and I think that's one way that I've grown as an editor. I've gotten the ability to, be more playful with the use of material.
If you were to teach a class on any aspect of the documentary form, are there specific films or scenes from films that you would play the students to illustrate a particular lesson, from your own work or from anyone else's?
Whoa, that's a good question. Wow, I might have to get back to you on that one. I've done a little bit of teaching this year, through doing master classes about editing. I mean, I've exclusively showed my own work. I don't know if I have got a good answer for you. I mean,
okay.
There's maybe in terms of like scenes that stand out for me as kind of or films. I mean, one of my favorite films from the Kartemquin catalog, and one of the films that in addition to, I was talking about Ira Glass earlier and Next Wave Films, Peter Broderick's company, but one of the early Kartemquin films that sort of brought me to them was this film called Inquiring Nuns from 1966. And it's one of the very first films that Kartemquin had done. And basically it's a verite-ish kind of film where Gordon Quinn, who's one of the founders of Cartemplin, and Jerry Temner go out on the streets of Chicago with two nuns and have the nuns asking people if they're happy. And that's the whole premise of the film. So they're just walking around, engaging with people, asking if they're happy. And Philip Glass did the score. It's one of the first scores he had ever done for a film. He was still a student at the University of Chicago at the time. And there's such, raw beauty in that film. There's such authenticity and such playfulness, both in terms of the questions that are being asked, the dynamics between the nuns and people who let their guard down and start engaging, and then also the Philip Glass score is beautiful and memorable and locks in with this 16 millimeter black and white footage in such a beautiful way. So I think that film in particular, still is one that grabs me because it has all the elements that I kind of think about or maybe am naturally inclined towards when I'm editing, trying to sort of find the authenticity and the beautiful moment in the raw material.
Yeah, well, that's a great recommendation. So that was a great answer.
Okay.
You didn't have to think too much on that. That was terrific.